about the third summer, which would have been 1940, second summer maybe, my father asked Julian if he would like to go on that trip with us. Julian and my father at that point had become close friends, and Julian said he'd like to see the Midwest, and so he did accompany us on this road trip to Illinois. This would have been about 1940, and the roads were poor, the car wasn't reliable, and the trips were long and tedious. We had to drive about 35 miles an hour on basically country roads to get from Alamosa to Aledo, Illinois. And so you never knew how long it was going to take, and you never knew where you might be stopping to sleep if you stopped to sleep. But we set out nevertheless, my mother and my father and Julian and I. Julian and I rode in the back seat together. I guess I was five years old at that time. And
did Julian help drive?
I don't believe so. I'm not sure that Julian had ever driven a car at that time.
Okay.
So I do not recall that he ever drove on that trip, or any other time for that matter. We traveled day and night, basically, until something happened where we had to stop. We got to through Kansas. It was in the summer, and it was hot. It was probably in the 90s, and miserable, really. No air conditioning, of course, in anything. Certainly not in the car. As we got to Missouri, we had been on the road probably for maybe 36 hours, 40 hours, I don't know how long. But it seemed as evening came that it was a good time to maybe stop and spend the night in a roadside, they call them cabin camps. They're the forerunner of today's motels. But typically there would be 5 or 6 little cottages in a circle off the highway a few yards, and you would pull in, and the owner would come out and talk to you, and if they had a cabin that was vacant, you could rent it for $2 a night maybe, which was a lot of money, but seemed like it might be worth it on that particular trip. Anyway, we got to this small town in Missouri. I don't recall the name of the town, and it was nearly dark, dusk, and we pulled into the driveway of the cabin camp, and my father got out and went to meet the owner and see if they had any cabins, and the owner said that they did, and so they were negotiating about which one we might stay in and what we would have to pay to do it and so forth. And they walked together, my father and the owner, back to the car. And the owner walked around the car, and he looked in the back seat, and he saw Julian and me. And he said to my father, "Is that a nigger in the back seat of the car?" And my father said, "No, he's Mexican-American, and he's traveling with us." And I remember the man said, "Well, he looks pretty dark to me." And so my father got in the car and we drove away. And I don't know that we ever did find a place to stay. I think we ended up driving to the next town and finding a public park and stopping and just taking a nap in the park for the evening. We went on the rest of the way on that trip. We finally reached Illinois, and then we spent about 2 weeks there. We'd first go to my father's parents' house, and we'd stay there for a few days, and then we'd go to my mother's parents' house and stay there for a few days, and then sometimes we'd come back again when they got tired of us. But we also spent a lot of time going around and seeing various aunts and uncles and cousins, because my parents both came from large families, and they had a lot of relatives, mostly living on farms in that region. And so we'd go up and down the roads and stop at each farmhouse and go in and have lemonade and talk to the families for maybe an hour, and then we'd say goodbye and go on. And Julian was with us, and he met all of the family members on that trip, and they were all bemused by him, I think. They hadn't ever seen anyone like Julian before. Julian was dark, and he didn't look like they did, and but they as I remember, they were quite accepting of him, and I think he enjoyed himself. We had, as I say, probably 2 weeks there, going around and seeing all our relatives and having chicken dinner practically every day, because when you went to visit relatives and friends in those days, and you were invited to stay for a meal, it usually was fried chicken. And so we got kind of sick of fried chicken, I think. But anyway, we enjoyed the trip, and we all eventually went back to Alamosa in the car the same way we got there. It was a long, slow, tedious trip, and I think Julian probably remembered that trip most of the rest of his life, because it was certainly a different experience than he'd ever had before. He must have been about 19 years old, I would guess, at the time. 5-year-old impression of Julian. Well, Julian was a tall, skinny kid, and I remember that he was a little gangly, maybe not awfully well coordinated. Getting in and out of the car was like folding up a Cracker Jack box or something and stuffing it in the back. And of course we both sat back there together, and there's not a whole lot of room in the back of a 1929 Chevy. So we were pretty close, but we were friends. It was the closeness was good.